My name is Andrew Moy. I'm from Tight Lines Fly Shop in Parsippany, New Jersey. I'm here today to teach you guys a little bit about spey casting. A lot of the basics were covered. What I want to do is show a lot of the mistakes in each of the different casts and how to identify what you're doing wrong and how to correct them. I'm going to start here in the beginning with a basic roll cast and just show a little bit about hand position and how different positions and what happens to your cast or to your line. So I'm gonna start with that. So a good thing to do when you're practicing is the first thing you should do is just learn a basic roll cast. And Simon went through a lot of this. I'm going to show some things when you're doing a roll cast that can go wrong. In a spey cast, generally speaking, we want to have the rod, when the rod tip is out in front of us, it should be relatively low. The rod never goes from high to low. It only goes from low to high. Okay, so when I'm doing a cast, even if I do a roll cast here, I want the rod relatively low, low, low. And then I'm going to elevate that rod into what's called a firing position. And this is a key position to learn. And if you understand this position, it'll help your cast because you'll know where you need to be prior to going forward. So when we get into this position, where the rod should be, this hand here, your top hand, should generally be about ear level. Your bottom hand should be out in front to where the rod's at about a 45-degree angle. If my bottom hand's too low, this is a bad position to start your forward stroke because my rod's too vertical. It's going to be very awkward to try and do a forward stroke from there. Okay, if my bottom hand's too high, I'm going to drop my rod. Now, more importantly, what I see very often as a common mistake is the bottom hand getting out too far. Watch what happens. See how the line dropped in at me? Right there, I lost all my tension in my cast. So we want to make sure that when we come into a firing position, we come up and that the line remains out to our side. If we're coming up to do a roll and we see that line jumping in, and this can be caused from a couple things. The top hand coming in too much or the bottom hand going out too much. If we bring that angle back out, we're in a much better position to make a roll from. So again, back, there's your firing position. Notice there's not a lot of movement here. And there's a lot, I see a lot of people on the internet and stuff sometimes arguing back and forth about bottom hand use. You do need some bottom hand. I have a tendency to teach not very much use of bottom hand on the back cast, but you do need to position the bottom hand to go forward. So when we do this roll again, you can see my bottom hand's not doing much. I get to here. Now I bring my bottom hand up to where, as I come forward, and Simon had talked about, is leading, 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 A to B, and then B to C. Right? And that's how we load the rod. The rod can only load when it's pointed in the direction of your line. Okay? In the case of spey casting here, we're forming a D loop. When that D loop is fully formed, we need to track the rod forward in this fashion before we turn the rod over. We need to track it like that and then turn it over. So when we do our roll, it's good practice again. Come back into this position, drive forward, and then turn the rod over. Now, the first one I did there was a roll cast, and the second one there was a switch cast. And if you look at the roll cast, okay, flat back, up to my firing position, and out, the switch cast is very similar. The only difference is I'm just inducing a little bit of energy to get my anchor further back. Okay, the anchor being the tip of the fly line. Okay, when I do the roll cast, as you can see, that anchor is way down here. In the switch cast, I'm bringing that anchor back. So this is our firing position again. Again, keep this, if you come off your elbow in a straight line, this hand should remain inside that line. If I get outside that line, I'm going to have over rotation. I'm going to lose the energy in my cast. So we go back to the roll, back up into the firing position, again, leading through. Now, when we make a switch cast, I'm going to start doing more of a switch cast now. Now we're actually forming a full D-loop. Okay, there's two ways you need to line the D-loop up, vertically and horizontally. Okay, vertically we're going to line it up by staying relatively flat on our back cast. If you look here, the rod tip is tracking level. And you can see I stayed level. If you notice here, the D-loop is pointed directly opposite of where I'm casting. That's because I also, not only did I stay flat, but I stayed in a straight line by, as I come back, I'm pulling in close and then pushing out. So the rod tip is tracking in a straight line. Now watch this. If I come back and I pull my top hand too close to me, that D-loop's going to start wrapping behind me. So a good thing to do when you're practicing is just watch, let your D-loop fall, and look at it and ask yourself, you see the top half of the D-loop? That's what loads the rod. Is the top half of the D-loop directly opposite where I'm casting? That's what you want to be looking for. There. And it's a very subtle move. It doesn't take a lot of energy to cast, very little. I'm pulling in, pushing out. What you need to do is draw a straight line. And if you look at this, okay, if you can picture, I'm like a point. You know what a compass is, to draw a circle on a piece of paper? I have this fixed length rod. I'm like the point of the compass. The biggest mistake I see for beginners is they have a tendency to go out first. Once your rod tip starts tracking like this, the only way at this point to stay in a straight line is to continue like this. But now I'm in a very awkward position to come forward. You want to learn to stay in close as you begin to move the rod back, and you're kind of pulling the rod. You're pulling the rod straight back. The rod can only load when it's pointed in the direction of the line. So you want to learn to track the rod in this fashion as long as possible before you get the rod to turn over. There. And then as you pass here, okay, so we go back to the circle. If my rod flies out, the only way to stay in a straight line is to go out, right? If I pull it in close now and I come past and I go like, I still come off the line this way, right? So the important thing is you pull it, but you also flare back out. As you pass perpendicular to where you're casting. If my cast becomes here, okay, let's say I do a double spay, I want to come around, I need to make sure that D-loop is lined up there. If I come out, it's the same thing. If I come out here, I'm going to have to go like that in order to get my D-loop to line up. If I go out here, most common thing to happen is that D-loop's going to over-rotate, and you can see now the D-loop's pointed that way. If my D-loop's facing that way, I need to be casting that way, but I'm trying to cast across the river right now. So what I'll do is stay in close, and then flare out. And you can see how the line stays tight to the rod and the D-loop is lined up with where I'm casting. Here, stay in close and then flare out and up. So let's go back to that switch cast. I do a lift here. Now the switch cast is an aerialized anchor cast. I'm actually lifting the line a little bit to relieve some water tension. It's unlike a snap tee or a double spay where I'm setting the anchor first. Once the anchor is set, I don't need to lift the rod anymore. All I need to do is track the rod back basically level and then out. In the case of a switch cast, which is also a single spay, do you guys know the difference between a switch cast and a single spay? A switch cast is just an inline aerialized anchor cast like this. A single spay is a switch cast with a change of direction. So when I do this switch cast, I need a lift. Okay, once I get to the top of my lift, I need to bring the rod relatively down, kind of level. The biggest mistake I see with this is people lift, and either they lift very fast, watch this, if I lift fast and then try and sweep back, what happens? My anchor piles up. I don't need any speed. This is simply what it's called. It's a lift. You want to lift very slow. Lift very slow. The speed is there. And it's not a lot of speed, but it's momentum. This is a very important aspect of all casting. Anytime you're doing a forward stroke or a backstroke or a snap, like on a snap tee, you need an acceleration. Okay, you need to accelerate the rod tip. So when I get to the top of my lift, there's no speed there. The speed is here. If I put an acceleration on my lift, what happens? The line goes up in the air, and then when I sweep back, it piles up, right? If I lift, that piles up. We want a slow lift, put the speed there. You always build momentum and then put the speed right at the end of the stroke. So a common mistake again is a lift like this. You know, if you get that right, another common mistake, and I'm going to teach you something here about reading your anchor. Right now I'm doing a switch cast. My anchor should be here. Okay, if I cast this way, my anchor should be here. Okay, if I decide I'm going to cast left-handed, then my anchor should be here if I'm casting this way. You guys understand this anchor position. So for my switch cast, I look at where I'm casting. Here, my anchor should be about 45 degrees between here. I'm going to teach you how to read your anchor. In other words, how to distinguish what you're doing by what your anchor is doing and where your anchor is going. So if I do my lift properly and I come back and my anchor is way out in front, most likely what I'm doing is I have improper acceleration. I'm just coming back too softly. Okay, now I'm leaving the anchor out in front. And this is caused very often from overthinking what you're doing. One of the biggest mistakes in fly casting, it's like any sport, you're hitting a golf ball or whatever, is we have a tendency to overthink what we're doing, which leads to tensing up your muscles. The tighter you are, the more rigid you become, it becomes more difficult. And you don't relax and flow. So one key is to really work on relaxing, being relaxed, and accelerating, flowing through your motion. When I start this sweep, when I start it, I got to keep going. I can go extremely slow, providing I am gaining speed. It doesn't take a lot of energy, as long as I'm accelerating. Now watch this. If I start fast and I end soft, where's my anchor? Left my anchor out in front. Okay, so again, start fast, end soft. You're not going to get that line moving. Key is get the line moving, drag the line a little bit, and then pop it. Pop it not being, you don't want to hero pop it, right? We want to just a little bit faster. You always got to come to an abrupt stop. So you always go momentum, a little bit of extra speed, abrupt stop. And that's really what gets that line moving. So again, if you see a low anchor, very often it's caused by a lack of acceleration. Relax, try and flow through the cast. The other thing that could cause a low anchor is just sweeping the rod simply maybe too low. That's a pretty, I don't see that as a common mistake. Most people have the opposite, a high rod, which I'll get into in a second. The other thing that could possibly cause a low anchor is a little bit of a dip kinda, and you can see that kind of left my anchor out front. And again, it leads to a crashing anchor as well. So once we figure out, okay, there's enough energy to where I'm getting my anchor back. Now, if you notice that your anchor is doing this, okay, if I just stay at the same height, what happened there? My rod's staying too high. My anchor is supposed to be here, but it's too far back. So the minute you see that your anchor is too far back, you know you've tracked the rod too high. Okay, so again, the other thing that could cause it, on this cast, what I'm going to do is I'm going to track the rod at the right height, but I'm just going to put too much speed into it. So even if I'm at the right height, if I put too much speed, now I'm doing more of an overhead cast. I'm putting so much energy that I'm fully extending the fly line. So the key here is just the right amount of energy and drawing a straight line, accelerate and stop. Now, where do we stop? We started talking about lining up both vertically and horizontally. If you look at where I stop here, the rod is at what I call 430 relative to my target. My target is here at 12 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 430. If I'm left-handed, you could call it 12 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 7:30. Okay? So I'm going to lift, I'm going to sweep level to 430. That's it. There's your back cast. I've already formed my D-loop. And now I go right back to where we started. We talked about the firing position. So if you can just learn, just get that lift, no speed on the lift, level sweep with an acceleration, stop at 430, lift the rod to the firing position. You've just developed your switch cast. Now let's talk a little bit about, I'm gonna kind of go into all the different spade casts and by what I just showed you how to distinguish what you're doing and how to fix them. So the first one I'll start with is a single spay. Okay, and a single spay, can anyone tell me where my anchor is supposed to be right now? I'm going to cast this way. We want our anchor here. Okay, so we're going to cast here. You always go 90 degrees to where you're going to cast, 45 degrees between, right here. That's where we want our anchor. So if I if I do my lift, this is the same cast as the switch cast. The only difference now is I'm turning the cast. If I come up like this and I sweep and I go very soft, what happens? I leave my anchor in front of me. When I make my forward cast, I'm going to cross my line. If I lift like this fast and I dip like this, I'm going to crash my anchor. If I lift like this and I stay high, I'm not going to get an anchor. My anchor is going to go too far back. So the way to learn how to do a single spay, and the biggest thing with a single spay, really with all your spay casts, is commit to your stroke. Like, convince yourself that you're doing the right thing. I'd rather see, when I work with people, I'd rather see them commit to the stroke and have a good flow through their stroke, rather than overthink the stroke, do it perfect, but not accelerate. Because if you don't accelerate, the line's not going to go in the right spot. You're not going to energize your back cast. You have to accelerate through it. So when you're learning, the best way to practice is really convince yourself to relax and flow. Relax and flow. So when I do my single spay, a good one, we're going to relax. I'm going to keep the elbow relatively in. I'm going to lift first. There's no speed on the lift. If I have a longer belly, I may have to lift and then begin my sweep right away. With these shorter bellies, we can get away with a lift and pause. Okay? From here, I'm going to bring the rod down. Okay, the rod, when I get to the top of my lift on a single spay, my rod should never go higher, but I should never drop it to the point where I lose tension. The way to drop this for a single spay is to kind of stay at the same height for an inch or two, and then begin to drop the rod and pull at the same time. The key is to commit to it. So I drop the rod and commit. There's my anchor. Now on this cast, it may splash a little bit more because I'm turning it. So I got to bring a little bit of momentum around. Lift, bring the rod around, lift again. Notice the important thing there at the end too is that I lifted my hands up into a firing position. If I lift like this and I sweep but I don't lift at the end, you can see how quickly, notice how quickly that D-loop fell to the water before I can go forward. So you want to make sure when you sweep, you lift, you sweep level, you lift again and cast. By lifting again, I'm keeping the D-loop aerialized. So the key again is lift, momentum, accelerate and stop, cast. And if I let the D-loop fall, you can see the D-loop was pointed directly opposite where I'm casting. That's what you're looking for. Other mistakes that happen with a single spay, it goes right back to the roll cast I started with. We'll be coming around and bringing that top hand too close. You can see I lose the anchor, the line's coming over the top of my head. You can potentially hook yourself in the back. Lift, sweep, right there. I'm in the same position as the roll cast. Go back to the roll cast. There's my firing position. A good thing too, if you can do it, and some people may have had shoulder problems or something, and some people have trouble with it, but if you can get yourself to get your elbow out in front of your forward cast, it'll really help you to develop a much better forward cast. You know, if you throw, a spear or something, the cavemen back in the day, they didn't go like this. You can't put anything on it. You got to get that elbow out in front to where you can drive. And that really, by getting the elbow out in front, it helps you to stay flat and linear. You need your forward stroke to be flat. It's kind of like throwing a baseball. If you watch it when they slow-mo those guys in baseball, some of those guys really get that elbow out in front. You don't need to do that, but it is good to be able to get that elbow out in front. It really helps that forward cast. So back to the single spay, lift, sweep around, firing position, and out. And I had a little bit of a low anchor there, and that was just caused by a little bit, not enough commitment. Now watch, if I just commit a little bit more, my anchor ends up higher. I had a better acceleration coming around. Put my anchor up higher. So that's a single spay. Anyone have any questions on any of this? On the single spay at all? No? Okay, now let's talk a little bit about the snap tee. Both the single spay and the snap tee for a right-handed caster are going to be river left cast. So in other words, my current's going to be going to the left. If I'm left-handed, it's going to be a river right cast. My current's going to be going to my right. Basically, the single spay and the snap tee are going to be both upstream anchor casts. They're going to be cast when my casting shoulder is on my upstream side. For a righty, it's river right. For a lefty, it's, for a righty, it's river left. For a lefty, it's river right. So the snap tee, when I do the snap tee, what I'm doing here is I'm positioning the tip of the line first. And Simon had talked about, you know, if you do it in front of you here, you end up with a very high anchor. I'm doing it on a wall here. If I do it down here, I'm going to end up with a little bit lower anchor here. That's okay if I want to cast more downriver, but for the most common cast, we're going to cast on an angle across the river here. So we want to do our snap here to get our anchor there. Another way of looking at it is what you can do. If I have a longer bellied spay line, I might pump some more line downriver, or bring the rod further downriver, and that'll help with a longer belly, because a longer belly, if I did my normal snap I would with this line here, the tip of my line on a longer belly is going to end up there. So I need to maybe pump it a little bit more to get my anchor a little bit down. On some of these short lines, you might want to stop the rod right here if I had a really short Skagit head or something, because the head's shorter. I don't want to bring my rod so far downriver. That's going to end up putting my anchor too far down in front of me. So the first thing with a snap tee is make sure, is my anchor in the correct spot? And it should be off to your side. Again, 45 degrees off to my side. And like Simon said, it's straight up, basically a capital letter D. Straight up, belly of a D, putting the snap underneath. At this point, I don't need a lift or anything. I just need to stay level. I already got an anchor. Level, firing position, and out. Sorry, buddy. Here, come around level, lift to the firing position. You can go very slow. As long as you're tracking, if you notice, watch how my bottom hand goes with the top. What that's really doing is it's really helping to load the rod, because I'm keeping the rod tip pointed at where the line is. When I do a snap tee, I'm using that there to load the rod. So I want to pull away from that in this fashion. Look how I get a nice fully formed D-loop with very little energy, because I'm tracking the rod. I'm getting that rod to load, and then I'm just turning that rod over to send that D-loop back. Again, here, track, with. Doesn't take a lot of energy. D-loop's lined up. Now you notice as I come around, we talked about when I did that roll cast, how I kind of flare out a little bit and then up to a firing position. Okay, switch cast, flare out a little bit. When I do this snap tee, I come around here right there. I just flare out a little bit. And you can see how that keeps the D-loop kind of tight to the rod. That's what you're looking for. You want that constant tension on the rod. And you get that by a couple things: staying level, flaring out a little bit, and lifting. And that'll keep the line tight to the rod. So, more common mistakes: dipping the rod. You can see now my line's hung up in front of me. If I see that my line is getting hung up in front of me, I'm probably dipping the rod, or I have a very soft acceleration. It goes right back to reading the anchor. Okay, my anchor is supposed to be here. Okay, yeah, my anchor's already formed, but if I dip like this, I still consider this anchor. I've left my line out in front. Okay, I need that line to all go back. If I keep that rod level, a little kick at the end, I fully form that D-loop. Snap, slow, level, up, and out. So that's the snap tee. Anyone have any questions on the snap tee? And again, one more thing, we want to always avoid over rotating our cast, getting beyond our firing position. Firing position's here. Learn this position. And listen, everybody's going to have different styles. You know, some people kind of reach back more or whatever and use more top hand. You know, some might want to stay in the pocket and cast like this. As long as you're getting the angle of the rod correct, and that angle is off to your side here. Again, it comes right back to here. That angle needs to be there, not there. It needs to be there. The minute the angle gets like this, I've lost my cast. Cast is done. So drill, I mean, go home, you know, when you practice, drill this. Drill, learn to lift, you know, and I'm over lifting now more, but learn to do this and keep that line off to your side. Learn to lift here. Keep the line out to your side. And then, as Simon said earlier, always stroke parallel to your line. If I stroke this way, I'm going to cross my line. If my line's here and I try and cast over here, I'm not lined up. So that was the single spay, the snap tee. We've gone over the switch cast. We talked about the roll cast and how that works. I'm going to do the double spay now. And now again, as a right-handed caster, I want to put my anchor down here because now my casting shoulder's on the downstream side. And I'm going to do that. Common mistakes here is either coming over very soft. If I come over too soft, I leave the anchor way downstream. So when I come around and I form my D loop, I have what Simon called a bloody L in the line, right? We need to get that anchor up higher by just putting enough energy into it to get the anchor just below me. A good way to do this, what I like to do, is kind of come over vertical, and then as you get to vertical, okay, you're coming over like this. As you get to straight up and down, drop the rod away. So in other words, you can go like this. I'm going to come up over, I get to here, drop the rod down and away. And this sometimes will set up your hand position better. Let me just kind of show, well, let me do a lefty. So what I want to avoid doing, I've seen a lot of people talk about kind of crossing the hands like this. But I feel if you're here, I mean, you can kind of uncross them and get it to line up. But I see a lot, it doesn't go well for some people. I feel if you kind of bring it over and don't use a lot of bottom hand and set yourself up where you're here. Okay? If the further over this hand is, the more this top hand's going to fly out. Now, in order to stay in a straight line, again, I got to go like this. So if I just keep my bottom hand over here and set the anchor here, now I can come around and form my D loop to make my forward cast. Okay, so come over vertical. As the rod gets vertical, drop it down and away. I'm set up in a good position to start my sweep. Now, another common mistake is just overpowering it, just going too powerful. Make sure your anchor is landing below you. Anchor in a double spay is always downstream of you. So good thing is just kind of energy, drop the rod. That's all you need right there. Level, 430, and out. Same thing, I'm staying level, stopping, coming up to the firing position, and forward. So I'll do it right-handed. Come over vertical, drop the rod down and away, come around level, lift the rod, and out. All the same mistakes. You can read your anchor again. If my anchor's here and I start my sweep and I dip the rod, you can see I leave line out in front of me. If I set my anchor and I sweep up here and my anchor's coming out of the water, I know that I've stroked too high because I've pulled the anchor out of the water. It's the same thing as that switch cast. Just lost my leader. When I did the switch cast, if I pull back too hard, my anchor goes too far back. Well, if I do my double spay and I'm too high here, I lost my anchor. So I know that if I lose my anchor goes too far back, either I'm, and this is why you don't want to lose your anchor. Thank you. So the loss of the anchor comes from either being too high or inclining too steeply. If you notice your forward stroke, let me do one here. If you know notice your forward stroke is doing this, coming down at the water, kind of crashing into the water, most likely you're stroking on an upward angle. Your D-loop's so high in the air and you've gone so high up, you've kind of gone so high up that really the only place to go down or forward is kind of down. So what you want to do is, again, stay level, stop, and lift. Very short stroke. Notice where I'm stopping, right here. I don't need to bring the rod way around to form the D-loop. I want to stop the rod prior to where I want my D-loop to line up, and then I want to bring the rod up to line up with where I'm casting. So let me just do this. If I was going to roll cast across the river, I would bring the rod up here, and I would stroke parallel to that line. So when I do my double spay, I keep the rod level, and then I line the rod up here, and I cast. So I stop prior to that position for the forward stroke. So that's a double spay. Dave, you grab me that other rod real quick. I'm gonna work with a long belly now, just because I wanted to do a little long belly, and I've lost my tippet on here from that rock. Thank you. Thanks, Dave. So I have a little bit longer belly now. This will require me to reach back a little bit more. Not a lot, but I need to flow a little bit. I need to really have good flow to get this line moving. Okay, I gotta make sure I have a good positive stop. And the other important thing is to lift and begin your forward stroke immediately. But do not turn the rod over. It's that same thing. We're leading through here, 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 then turning the rod over. So when we cast here, we sweep, we lift, we immediately come forward. But again, learn to come forward without actually turning the rod over. If you notice, that rod's tracking like this until the very end, and then I turn the rod over. And I turn the rod over by doing two things, kind of dropping and pulling the bottom hand. Sweep, lift, and out. So just to kind of show you the difference in stroke length, you can see because of the longer belly, need a little bit longer stroke length. But you notice again, I'm flaring out. I'm staying in close and I'm flaring out, making sure you can see that D-loop is consistently lined up. That's what we need. Now if I go to, I'm going to do my spiral roll now, and I'm going to show you a couple of mistakes I see that are very common with this. The first one is, this is a cast that really requires you to commit to it. If there's any hesitation in your spiral, you're going to lose the load in the rod. The key to keeping the rod bent, the key to learning to cast faster and faster, is always keep the rod moving. And always keep the rod moving faster and faster. Okay, I need to go fast to deliver the back cast, and then I need to accelerate forward. When I do my spiral, the big thing I see when people do a spiral is they're so anxious to make a forward stroke that they put the stop of the, or they start their spiral and they stop there, thinking about making a forward cast. So they kind of do this, and then they try and make their D-loop, but it kind of throws things off. The key with the spiral roll is keep it moving. Don't hesitate. When I do it, I commit to it. So I start slow. I always, and again, if you notice, if I go out too far, it may be awkward. So bring your hands on either side of your body. Start here. So you always want to, when you're in the beginning, in the front of your stroke, you always got to have your hands close, and as you pass perpendicular, then you flare out a little bit. So the key to this spiral roll is stay in the pocket, commit to the spiral, and then flare out at the end. Don't hesitate, keep the rod moving. If I want to cast more downriver, you can see I did my spiral more on a wall this way to cast that way. If I want to cast more straight across the river, I do my spiral on a wall parallel to where I'm casting. If I want to cast upriver, I bring the rod this way to cast that way. If I want to cast downriver, again, I pull it here. You can see my D-loop is always lined up with where I'm casting. Anywhere I'm casting, that D-loop's always lined up. And I'm always accelerating, always flaring away from my body in line with where I'm trying to cast, directly opposite of where I'm trying to cast. And I'm always stopping. This cast is really the same thing. Come around, there's 4:30. I'm stopping at 4:30 relative, 12 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 4:30. D-loop is at 6 o'clock. Now, a common mistake, another common mistake I see with this cast, again, it's non-committal to the stroke. If I kind of start fast and I kind of hesitate, I lose all my momentum. I didn't even get the line to begin moving. If I just go slower and keep it moving, it works. Now, another mistake I see is when they do the spiral, what you want to do, it's kind of like a letter E, but you don't want to drop down too far. You want to do almost more than a lowercase e, is just do an oval. And the big mistake I see is when people come around the front is they dip too far down here. And you'll know you're doing that because you'll dip like this and then you'll come up like this and the line will look something like that. It'll come in at you. You could see the D-loop was way up in the air because I dipped so low in the front, it caused me to go up. So when I do my spiral, I want to stay high and then cut back level. So stay high, cut back level. You notice when I came around the nose of this motion, I didn't dip way down. I stayed up high and then cut back level. Stay up high, cut back level. And all these casts, every cast we do today, that I've done today, you're always ending up again in the same position, your firing position. So when I do the spiral, I'm just ending up in this same position every time. If I do a single spay, I'll go back, I'll do a single spay left hand. I need my anchor up here. If I come up and I come real soft, again, anchor's way too far down, that cast is not going to work. If I come up and I stay too high, what happens? My anchor flies out too high and it's very awkward to go forward. I need to lift, bring the rod down and commit. There's the anchor. Anyone have any questions on any of that? No? Does anyone want to see anything in particular? Is there anything that's you're having trouble with that maybe I could go over?
A little bit of mending.
Mending? Okay. What I can show you too is a lot of times you can incorporate your mend right into your cast. So I could do a spiral here, make my cast, and put the mend right into the cast. So now I'm allowing that fly to sink, obviously. A lot of times what I'll do is I'll hold that rod up and I'll drop it and then bring it down around. Now I have a little bit of a belly there and that fly is at this point gotten down. I do want a belly, obviously, to allow that fly to swing. The way the current is here, you can see there's a heavy current in the middle that's keeping the tip of my line out here. I probably wouldn't mend in this particular spot like I just did, but again, a good thing to do is just put the mend, stop your forward stroke and then put your mend. And it's incorporated right into your cast. rather than casting and then trying to mend. Certainly they both work. The nice thing you can see about this long belly is I can really mend and control it very easily because I've got belly to work with. You get into the shorter bellies with a running line, you know, you do more lift mends than you do flip mends. So, what's that?
How big of a belly do you want? Straight line?
You're saying when you're swinging it? I like, it depends, you got to go by, and I'm sure, I think Rick went through a lot of this, but you got to go by temperature, depth, and speed. Okay, the warmer the water, the slower the water, the shallower the water, the faster or the less mending you want. You know, the deeper, the colder, the faster the water, then you might want to mend a little bit more if you feel you need to get the water. Now, you might be in very fast water that's relatively deep, but the water temp's warm, so the fish are active, so maybe you don't need a lot of mending. Maybe you want that fly pulling closer to the surface because you want to get a reactionary strike from the fish. We do a lot of Atlantic salmon fishing in Canada, and one thing I find is a lot of people want to mend. You know, their first instinct is mend, mend, mend. And I feel that sometimes mending, especially for Atlantic salmon, it takes the swing out of the fly. You want that fly pulling. Now, granted, Salmon River, we're doing a lot of late fall, winter steelhead fishing. Obviously, the water's much colder. You definitely want to, and steelhead like, I think on average, steelhead like the fly moving a little slower than, let's say, the current speed, whereas Atlantic salmon might want the fly pulling faster than the current speed. So you got to go by, again, water temperature, speed, and depth, but also the species of fish you're going for and kind of how they react. And, you know, you might find a day they want the fly faster and a day they want the fly slower. You know, maybe barometric pressure dictates that the fish want the fly a little slower. Maybe they're not in the mood, so you got to pull a little slower, you know. But again, we can incorporate that mend here. Sometimes you might want a downstream mend. You know, sometimes salmon fishing, again, I want that fly fast. I'm going to bring that line downstream to allow that belly to pull right away. Does that cover, kind of? Yep. Any other questions on anything? No? My 40, I don't know where my time is. My time's up? Okay. Sorry if I went too long. Thank you.